Hello, it's Sarah from Hardcover Hearts, and I'm here with my week of reading wrap-up. This is where I talk about the books that I read last week, what I'm currently reading, and potentially could read next week based on my mood. So I had a really great week. I made mention in a previous video that I really needed to do something about my toppling shelf on NetGalley. I had done the rookie mistake when I first started NetGalley, before I even started BookTube, of making a bunch of requests, assuming that I wasn't going to get even a fraction of them. Yeah, that was a really, really bad assumption. And so I got a lot and then was quickly overwhelmed and kind of stepped away from it. Well, I felt bad, so I needed to go back and kind of clean that up and get some of that completed and done. So that's what I decided to focus on this month, was to really use March Mystery Madness as an opportunity, because a lot of them were mysteries. So let me preface that by saying that many of these are NetGalley books that I'd had on my shelf for a while, and I'm just delighted to really be cracking on with this project. I completed 7 NetGalley books this month. I have 2 that I'm in progress with. But let's talk about what I read this last week so that we can kind of start there. So the first one that I completed is a doozy. This one is exceptional. It's exceptional. It's called The Borrowed, and it's a book written by Ho-Kei and translated by Jeremy Tiang. Just remarkable. This is remarkable in the sense of construction, in the sense of how it was written, in the sense of what it's trying to accomplish, how much it gives you. So this is more than just a police procedural book, which is what it looks like when you first started. This is set in present day, but moves backward in time, focusing on one detective. So we meet him at the end of his life, at the height of his career, at just the pinnacle of everything. And then we start to look back at 6 different cases back through time. And it's set in Hong Kong. And so the time frame ends up being so unique and interesting because he goes through and we get to see the change of power from London to Beijing as the transfer was starting to happen, where the transfer started to encroach earlier on in the police force and in the security forces. Just ends up being such an interesting look at Hong Kong and through this specific lens of the police procedural. And I think I've made mention before, the reason that I really like mysteries in translation is because you assume a certain level of grounding, but you end up learning so much about the culture, how they deal with law, how they deal with police, how they deal with these types of things differently. What does it mean to have rights? Are their rights the same as our rights? What's available to prisoners? What's not available? What can police do? What can they not do? I find that stuff fascinating. And this book was kind of at the pinnacle. Absolutely outstanding. So I would highly advise, if you like this kind of thing, this might be one that you would also enjoy immensely. Now let's talk about a weird one. And I have to give a shout out to Roz of Scandandling about the books, because she put a comment in when I mentioned this last week that this is a weird one. And I think if you hadn't tipped me off that it was going to get weird, I would have been lost. This is the very famous Lolly Willows by Silvia Townsend Warner. So gorgeous little book here. This is a subversive little oddball of a book. So we deal with some of the things that I love. So I love a spinster, an unmarried woman who doesn't want to get married, who's okay with her circumstance and being a widow. She's not pining for anybody. She just wants to live her life. Those are my favorite kinds of women stories. And in this, we have a woman who's like the aunt. Her name is Laura, but her nephew calls her Lolly, and it just kind of sticks. And so then her role becomes really the aunt. And And she just wants to be on her own and live her own life. And she becomes fascinated with this little village in this little town and decides that she's leaving everything. She's going to leave the comfort of her brother's home where she's been living, and she's going to set off on her own and live in this little village, which was very, very unusual at the time. This was written in 1927, so you get a sense of how subversive this really is, the story. She moves to this little town and these strange things start to happen. Now, this is very atmospheric. There's not a lot of dialogue. There's not a lot of action, but there's a lot of atmosphere. If it weren't so short, I probably would have dumped it and been sad about it, because the ending near the end, I would say the last maybe quarter, is really where it pulled me in and got me. Let's just say that for the times, I'm stunned that this was released. Not because it's sexual or anything like that or lurid, but it's shocking in its material, subversive, like I said, and so weird. It's a weird one. I'm glad I read it. This will definitely be included in my strange old lady spinster lit, which I adore. I say spinster with the greatest of respect, by the way. So there we go. So the next thing that I read was fan fiction at its best. This is the Heiress, Revelations of Anderberg by Molly Greeley. This just came out this year, 2021, and it's the story of Anderberg. Now, if you know your Pride and Prejudice, Anderberg is the cousin that was supposed to be married off to Mr. Darcy. And so it had been arranged in the family, and her mother, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, is this horrible woman, just really controlling, really difficult woman. I was like interested when I heard this was coming out. I thought, oh, well, that's curious, because in Pride and Prejudice, if you're not aware, guess what? Darcy doesn't marry her. I won't say what else happens, but he doesn't end up with her. Well, I can say that pretty distinctly. And so what happened to her? What was her story? And so I love when books do this kind of adjacent thing, where there are the adjacent characters that are kind of like off to the side. They're the side plotted characters, are kind of brought forward. It's very tricky, in my humble estimation. It's very tricky because I don't want too much of the characters that I've already read. I want a subtle hint of them. I want to be in the same milieu. I'd like to hear about them every once in a while, but I've already read their books. I want to read the other story and how it intersects and interrelates. So it requires a fine touch. I think she did this. She did this because she takes us on a full life story of Anne, and how Anne really was the victim of bad medicine, and she was the victim of medicating colicky, difficult children who were just struggling in their infancy, and how that continued through her life and really created a dependency and an addiction to laudanum. So in this book, we have Anne, who is incredibly smart, incredibly capable, but crippled by this drug addiction that, and by maybe, I don't want to say Munchausen by proxy, because I think that's too strong in this case, but absolutely her mother has a set idea of who she is and who she will be in the future, and she is constrained by that notion. You already have that interesting setup, because we know Catherine de Bourgh as like this horrible woman, very bossy, very controlling. But now we see her with a daughter who she has diminished, physically diminished and mentally diminished because of addiction to laudanum. Through best intent and best intentions, she doesn't realize, or does she? So that already is interesting. Then on top of that, we have her coming into her own and coming into her own feelings of desire and interest and admiration, and not really sure if it's her or if it's the drugs that are talking. And so understanding her own instincts and understanding herself in the search for self-identity, it adds extra layers of interest and complexity to the story that I thought were fantastic. So this had a lot of things that in my wheelhouse: the full life story, the adjacent character retellings, historical fiction. So this was a win for me for sure. Now let's go to something that I didn't like as much. And it dawned on me by doing this exercise of going through these NetGalleys, is that I know myself as a reader so much that most of my books fall in the 3 to 4 range. Very few are 5. 5 for me is that unicorn, that exceptional. Most are 3 to 5, meaning I like them or I really like them. They are great books. And it's because I really know my taste and I really know what I'm prone to or biased to like already. So, but you don't really get that kind of option when you don't know anything about a book and you're kind of going in blind just from the blurb from the publisher, which happens with NetGalley. So through this process, I've been able to see that I do have discernment when it comes to reading, and there are things that I don't like, and I can tell a bad book. I was starting to question myself, like, am I just so in love with all the books that I read, and have I lost my ability to critique? Well, no, I haven't. Let me talk about Lola by Melissa Shriver-Love. This came out in 2017. And it's a crime thriller based in LA. What attracted me to it is it's the story of a woman who is the drug cartel leader. And she is kind of hiding in the shadows. And she's pushed a man out, her boyfriend Garcia, and she allows him to take all the accolades and be seen as the leader, but she's really running the show. And her team knows this, but nobody on the outside knows this. And her gang is the Crenshaw Six. So I'm interested in women and power. I'm interested in women taking power. I'm interested in these types of stories. I think that the book was well written. It's episodic. It has a lot of twists and turns, and from a writing perspective, well done. The woman who wrote this book was a writer for television. And in the blurb, it says that she grew up with a policeman father and a court stenographer mother. And therefore, we're supposed to assume that gives her a certain entree into kind of this world. But I'm not sure about you all, but my father was an industrial engineer. I know nothing about industrial engineering. My mother was a teacher. I don't know that much about the act of teaching. So I find that a very suspicious thing to kind of hang your hat on. And the other thing is, I think that had this come out with American Dirt, it would have absolutely raised some hackles, because Lola is a Latina woman. She's an American. She's lived in America. Her family has lived in America, but she is of Mexican descent. And there just was no viable reason why this had to be a Mexican woman. This had to be a Latina, other than following into the quick stereotypes that you have about Latin drug cartels and all of that, and Mexican drug cartels and all. And so I just think it was a cheap way of shortcutting, and I think it was leveraging off of a stereotype, and I didn't like it, because this story could have been told with a white woman. It could have been a white woman as a drug leader. I mean, there's certainly white people engaged in the drug cartel, not just as buyers, right? So yeah, complete miss for me. And one other thing, I cannot stand when a book presents a woman who is strong and challenging and difficult, but then her heart is opened by the love of a child, and so again, pulling on the trope of women's instinctual need for motherhood. I'm not saying that there are many women who do feel that, but there are also many of us who don't. So again, another huge knock against this book. Now let's talk about a book that I liked better. 21 Days by Anne Perry, and this was put out in 2018. So I've come to learn that Anne Perry is a very difficult, comes with a loaded history. And I am still processing how I feel about that, because I do believe in redemption. If you don't know, Anne Perry was involved when she was a teenager of the beating death of her best friend's mother. And she did time for it. She paid her price and back to society, and has lived a life free of further violence, further in police involvement ever since. But she writes crime fiction, historical crime fiction. She does it very well. So at what point do you say that she's good at this? She hasn't done anything bad since. She paid her price, hopefully has learned from it, because she hasn't done anything like this again. Should she not? Would you be more comfortable if she was a school teacher? Would you be more comfortable if she was living out in society and doing and engaged in the community more? Or is this an appropriate career? I don't know the answer to that. I'm still working it out in my head, but I would love your thoughts. Let's talk about this book, though. This is the first of a series. This is the Daniel Pitt series. So she also did a famous series, which is Daniel's Father and Mother, which I read the first one. That's how I found out about her backstory. And this is set in 1910. And Daniel is a young lawyer. He's just starting off in London. We open the book with him trying one of his earlier cases and being able to get someone off through very interesting means, detective means that were not available at that time. Or at least lawyers weren't getting involved at the time. And so we kind of see like him being almost an early Perry Mason, as it were. So straight off the heels of that win, he's asked to join a very contentious but high-profile case of a famous biographer who is on trial for killing his wife in a very brutal way. He is asked to support a more senior barrister with the firm, who he doesn't really have a good relationship with. And he's a young pup. He's kind of ambitious and has all these new ideas. Well, he gets into the courtroom and his older colleague is deposing the witness, and the witness is actually the defendant, and it's not going well because he's really difficult. He's very cold. He's very proper, and he just looks. It makes him look guilty. So he asks if he can do something, and he does, in essence, what I would call a Hail Mary pass, which is shocks the guy into showing some emotion. And although it does a little bit to humanize him, it doesn't go far enough, and the guy is convicted. In the meantime, it definitely irritated his co-barrister, who wasn't really happy to have the rug pulled out from underneath. But at the same time, the older barrister recognized that they were in a sinking ship, and that maybe it helped a little bit, but ultimately they weren't going to get the guy off anyway. Well, they go back to the office after hearing that their client has actually been found guilty and has 21 days before he is going to be hung. At this stage, both of them think that he might be guilty. So they're given two different tasks. The older barrister is given the task to see about are there any legal technicalities that can help change the case. And then Daniel Pitt is given the idea of see if there's any other witnesses or anything that we missed, kind of investigation type style. And that's how it splits off, and that's how we start down this path. It's really twisty-turny. I do love a clock kind of timeline where you only have a certain number of days in order to get something. I think that is an interesting constraint. I prefer that to a locked room, by the way. But she's a great writer. She's a really good writer. It's a really good start to an interesting series. My understanding is there's a total of 4 out now by this time, because I'm delayed in getting this review out. But I enjoy her writing style. So that was 21 Days by Anne Perry. So that's what I've read. Now let's talk about what I'm currently reading. Leo and I are really going to kick out the jams on this one. We're going to finish this. This is Proust's Volume 2 of In Search of Lost Time series. This is In the Shadow of Young Girls in Flower. We're going to finish this by the end of this month. And I don't know if Leo is going to continue with me to read the rest of the series, but I'm going to. Now it's going to take me forever, but I will persevere. What we found, and I think this is interesting to talk about, is that he writes beautiful sentences, but as the character grows and gets older, there's less of the things that we loved about the very first book, Swan's Way, which was, exceptional, absolutely exceptional. This has interesting bits and pieces of it, where we get that Proustian, really honed in, tight look at something. Something. It could be a mandolin. It could be a church, the stained glass in a church, or the stones out in front of it. We don't get a lot of that right now because he's kind of in this growth area, young man, and coming out in the world and doing annoying young man things. So I am hoping that we get back to more of those reflections as we grow in his life. We'll see. I am also hoping to continue to finish this by the end of this month. This is Hisham Matar's The Return, Fathers, Sons, and the Land Between. This is just very emotional, so I only take a little bit of it at a time, but the writing is exceptional, and I could probably go a little bit faster on this. Then in real life book club, we are reading the next of our Man Booker shortlist books. This is The Shadow King by Maaza Mengiste. And this is set in Ethiopia in 1935. And we open following a young woman who has been kind of adopted, put to work in a substitute family contentiously, and war is about to break out. So we have a lot of factors at play here. We have the Italians coming. We have Haile Selassie as the emperor. We obviously know World War is about to break out, and independence. The desire of people to have their own independent African nation is there. So there's a lot of heady stuff at the very beginning of this. Looking forward to seeing where this goes. We'll be reading this throughout. We're going to read it in hopefully in 4 weeks. Then I also am doing another of my net galleys. This is Death on Victoria Dock by Kerry Greenwood. This is the 4th of the Phryne Fisher series, and this has anarchists and wobblies and just really in Latvia, and she packs a lot, and she does some really great research. I have to say I am in love with the Phryne Fisher series. This will be my second, completely out of order, but I will rectify that. So that's that. I would love to know, have you read any of these? Do you have any thoughts about any of these that I've talked about? I would also please ask that we are so close to the finish line of this pandemic. I have found out that California is opening up all of access to the vaccine on the 15th of next month, turning what is usually tax day into one of the best days ever. So I will be looking for an appointment to get my own vaccine very, very soon. I was talking to somebody that the things that I want to do most are obviously to get my hair done, because this has been a challenge, get a massage, but ultimately to do introverted things just outside my apartment. It's like that is the stuff that I'm most excited about. Going to used bookstores and just spending my time luxuriating among all of the old finds, going and reading at libraries, reading in parks, doing things like this that I'm scared to do right now. So those are the things I look forward to most. Since we're in the home stretch, please maintain safe social distance when you're out. Wear a mask or two, wash your hands, and do not touch your face. And that's it for me for now. I'll look forward to talking to you next week. Bye.